back inside the lab. This week, Team Prestige got a little sneaky and borrowed a car from the boss's personal garage to show you viewers at home one of the rarest supercars from the 2000s. This car was created by two of the most innovative automotive manufacturers the world has ever seen. Both of these companies have a rich history in motorsport and have even won Formula One world titles together. These companies worked hand in hand for years to bring one of the first everyday supercars to life. It's our pleasure to present the 2009 Mercedes-Benz SLR McLaren 722S Roadster. Before we dive headfirst into one of the most striking designs to ever sport a three-pointed star, let's break down the incredibly long name of the Mercedes-Benz SLR McLaren 722S Roadster. SLR stands for Sport Leicht Rennen, or Sport Light Racing, which pays homage to the W196S Mercedes-Benz 300 SLR. The 300 SLR was a race car created by Mercedes in the 1950s that took most of the drivetrain and chassis components from the 1954 W196 Formula One car. Mercedes also incorporated the 2.5-liter straight 8 from the Formula One car, then bored and stroked the displacement to 3 liters and boosted the car to 310 horsepower. To recap, yes, they took the engine out of a Formula One car, placed it in a more road-going race car, and then gave it more power. The 300 SLR only weighed 1,940 pounds and had a power-to-weight ratio better than a 2012 twin-turbo V12 SL65 AMG and a 2018 twin-turbo V8 E63 AMG S-Wagon. Only 9 300 SLRs were ever built, and they have been rumored to fetch a price tag of over $40 million apiece. In 1955, the W196S 300 SLR was entered into the Mille Miglia. After starting at 7:22 a.m. and racing for 10 hours, 7 minutes and 48 seconds, the SLR took first place with Stirling Moss and his navigator Dennis Jenkinson at the helm.
Stirling Moss. But 10 hours later, it's Moss who crosses the line to win in record time. Fangio comes second.
Not only did Benz finish first, but the SLR took second place with Juan Manuel Fangio commanding the race car solo. Moss won with an average pace of 97.96 miles an hour, over 990 miles, and went on to say the SLR was the greatest sports racing car ever built. Really, an unbelievable machine. Petrolicious has an amazing piece on Stirling Moss's victory with the beloved 300 SLR that we highly recommend you check out. In 1955, the W196S SLR was entered into the 24-hour of Le Mans. The race car was sporting drum brakes and didn't have an advanced disc brake system like its competitors. However, Benz had the innovative idea to give the car a large rear-mounted windbrake to help slow the car from speeds as high as 180 miles an hour. Unfortunately, during the 1955 24-hour of Le Mans, the 300 SLR was involved in a crash at triple-digit speeds, and it led to the deadliest accident in racing history. This caused Mercedes-Benz to withdraw from Formula One for almost 40 years, until they began supplying Ilmor-designed engines to McLaren's Formula One team in 1955. This partnership lasted almost 20 years and brought about 3 Formula One Drivers' Championships in the years of 1998 and 1999 with Mika Häkkinen and 2008 with Lewis Hamilton. During this beautiful racing romance, McLaren and Mercedes also joined together to build a road car. In 1999, McLaren agreed to design and manufacture a car in conjunction with Mercedes-Benz at the McLaren Technology Center in Woking, UK. However, it wasn't all smooth sailing at first. Mercedes wished for their new project, named the Vision SLR concept, to be a reinvention of the 1955 SLR, and wanted to use a carbon fiber structure similar to McLaren's former success, the F1. The British company, along with their legendary engineer, Gordon Murray, listened to these requests and presented a mid-engine vehicle design that weighed somewhere in the realm of 3,000 pounds. Mercedes loved the design, but sent McLaren back to the drawing board as they insisted the project must be front-engined. Thus, they recreated the design and came up with the Vision SLR concept that was shown at the North American International Auto Show in 1999. The concept was set to make 557 horsepower from its front-mounted 5-liter supercharged AMG V8 engine and had the ability to go over 186 miles an hour. Not only was the final production car stylistically similar to the concept, but it was faster as well. Dubbed with the internal code of R199, the Mercedes-Benz SLR McLaren was introduced to the public in 2003 at the Frankfurt Motor Show. The SLR had an original MSRP of about $450,000. It was one of the fastest production road cars Mercedes-Benz had ever built. The car had a revised rear end compared to the Vision concept, and all of the body panels, including the crash structure, were constructed out of carbon fiber. The designers even incorporated a prominent nose on the front of the hood to show homage to the McLaren Mercedes Formula One cars. Thanks to the genius of Gordon Murray, McLaren was able to give the SLR a specially bonded 4-piece carbon fiber monocoque that aided in reducing weight while also providing the highest levels of structural rigidity. If we're mentioning Gordon Murray in this story, then we have to dive into the aerodynamics of this car.
Aerodynamics has always been at the front of my mind.
Murray wanted to implement a flat underbody for rushing air to meet a rear diffuser for better aero, and thus requested that AMG create a unique side exhaust system. Above those tailpipes, you'll notice functional side air vents that help cool the catalytic converters and mufflers that flank the engine on each side. The production car ended up with a higher drag coefficient than the concept car, as Murray traded drag for better cooling. But that just allows for the SLR to live up to its everyday supercar abilities. Mercedes-Benz and McLaren continue to draw inspiration from the original 1955 300 SLR race car, and gave the modern SLR a deployable air brake that also functions as a rear spoiler. The air brake rises to about 10 degrees at 60 miles an hour, can be switched to a 30-degree angle for more downforce, and under hard braking, the wing rises to 65 degrees to provide as much drag as possible to slow the SLR down. The modern SLR also takes inspiration from the wonderful 300 SL, and incorporates dramatic gull wing doors that allow for spectators to know that this is not your grandfather's retirement Mercedes. Despite all of the carbon fiber implementation, the SLR still had a curb weight of 3,858 pounds. This relatively heavy weight had many scratching their heads as they tried to decide if the SLR was a hardcore racer or super GT. However, just because the SLR is hefty, don't think it doesn't have sports car-like qualities. The engine layout was changed from front-mounted in the Vision concept to a front mid-mountain layout, as McLaren moved the engine more than 3 feet behind the front bumper and almost 2 feet behind the front axle. This gave the car a 49/51 weight distribution. The engine they nestled behind the front axle was enlarged from 5 liters to 5.4 liters by Mercedes-AMG. Codenamed the M155, the V8 was based off the M153 engine found in the R230 SL55 AMG. The M155 may seem mechanically bleak on paper, as it only has 3 valves per cylinder and doesn't even have a dual overhead cam. However, with the twin-screw supercharger creating 13 psi, the M155 V8 generates 617 horsepower and 575 pounds-feet of torque. Fun fact, unlike its main competitors of the time, the Ferrari Enzo and the Porsche Carrera GT, the SLR's engine and transmission aren't directly bolted to the chassis. Instead, they're mounted on an aluminum subframe for reduced vibration and noise. This further complements the SLR's value as a true super GT instead of a hardcore racer. It's interesting to see that one of the most expensive cars Mercedes had ever created was engineered without the plethora of adaptive suspension systems or hydraulic body control units that are common to the brand. However, the SLR does feature the rather complex electro-hydraulic braking system, dubbed Sensotronic Brake Control from Mercedes. It measures the inputs on the brake pedal and then interprets how hard to clamp down on the rotors themselves. Even though the brakes are carbon ceramic and have plenty of stopping power, the system is rather inorganic in its feel, and it's one area of contention amongst automotive journalists, as they said the brakes were quite difficult to modulate. The SLR sends its power through Mercedes-AMG Speed Shift R 5-speed automatic transmission that could be manually controlled by finger wheel mounted fingertip buttons. Working in conjunction with the brake intervention system as opposed to a locking differential, the powertrain helps the SLR reach a claimed 0 to 62 time of 3.8 seconds. A sub 4 second 0 to 62 time was impressive in the early 2000s. But what was even more impressive was that Car and Driver was able to crack 62 in just 3.4 seconds, and Motor Trend was able to do it in 3.3. However, we're not just talking about any SLR today. We're talking about the incredibly rare 2009 SLR McLaren 722 S Roadster. The 722 is named to honor the original 300 SLR that Stirling Moss victoriously piloted in the 1955 Mille Miglia.
At the finish, just over 10 hours later, it's Moss who crosses the line to win in record time.
During that era of racing, cars left the start line at 1 minute intervals. And when Moss left the start line, it was 7:22 a.m. Thus, the modern SLR honors the legendary 1955 win by naming itself after history. Don't think for a second that the 722 S Roadster is just some clever marketing ploy by Benz to crank out a special edition model with no performance backing. The M155 V8 received new cylinder wall liners, a new oil injection system, a revised twin-screw supercharger, lightweight forged connecting rods and pistons that help it create 641 horsepower at 6,500 RPM and 605 pounds-feet of torque at 4,000 RPM. And even though this engine isn't completely exposed, popping open the single-piece carbon hood to see the M155 is still something we can all cherish as enthusiasts. Mercedes and McLaren also reworked the suspension and used forged aluminum wherever they could to add strength and reduce weight. The ride height was also lowered by 10 millimeters, and the spring and damping rates were changed to cope with more power and add a little bit more agility to the Super GT. The 722 was also given new 19-inch forged wheels that helped house even bigger 390 millimeter carbon ceramic rotors and 8-piston caliper brakes by Brembo in the front. The 722 was also given a special crystal antimony gray paint job to mirror the 1955 300 SLR. McLaren also put the SLR 722 into the wind tunnel and crafted small wheel spoilers for cleaner airflow along the rear. They also added a new carbon fiber splitter that claims to increase front end downforce by 128%. And no, that's not a typo. The rear spoiler also rises 5 degrees more in each of its various positions to provide more rear downforce. Admittedly though, the Roadster version of the 722 negates the race-inspired diet with its retractable soft-top roof. But it doesn't change the fact that this car can still reach 0 to 62 miles an hour in 3.7 seconds, blitz past 124 miles an hour in 10.6 seconds, and go on to a top speed of 208 miles an hour, making it one of the fastest convertible supercars ever made. And because it's a Mercedes-Benz, simple aspects such as the windshield wipers are over-engineered so they work at over 200 miles an hour. To go experience the convertible lifestyle at speeds higher than 208 miles an hour, you have to enter an entirely different echelon of exotics, such as the Pagani Huayra Roadster and the Bugatti Veyron Vitesse. Not only does the SLR keep its performance without the roof, but it also keeps iconic gull-wing doors in Roadster form, whereas other manufacturers are forced to revert back to traditional doors. When you frame the 722 S Roadster with the likes of those hypercars, the SLR can be seen as a kind of rare supercar bargain. With all those special characteristics, you may be asking, how rare is the SLR 722 S Roadster? With only 150 models made for the entire world, the 722 S Roadster represents less than 10% of all SLRs ever made. In 2018, Mercedes-Benz sold a 2009 SLR 722 S Roadster with approximately 16,000 miles for, drumroll please, $1.45 million. However, if you look on the market, you'll find plenty of SLRs with thousands of miles on their odometers. And I think it's an interesting aspect that solidifies the SLR's true identity as a Super GT. Many expensive supercars are driven maybe a couple hundred miles a year, at most. But that doesn't seem to be the case with SLRs. Sure, the steering and braking can be a little troublesome at the limit, but when you dial it back from the 10/10ths driving to 6/10ths, the SLR becomes an incredibly wonderful daily supercar. And being a Super GT is truly what the SLR does best. With its user-friendly automatic gearbox, long wheelbase, and sedan-like weight, the SLR can cruise at speeds well over 100 miles an hour without demanding much of the driver. The trunk can still accommodate the luggage of you and your lucky co-pilot. And when the weather is pleasant, you can drop the top and enjoy a therapeutic session with nature and the wicked sound of that supercharged V8. And with the dream of commanding this multicultural Super GT fresh in your mind, let's transition into the interior of the SLR. Following the tradition of most limited edition models, the interior receives a slight refresh to add an extra element of exclusivity. The 722 is dressed with carbon fiber, Alcantara, and leather throughout the cabin. The SLR is equipped with carbon back seats that have a sporty look, but a surprisingly limited amount of adjustability, something you normally wouldn't find in a Mercedes. The view in front of you is all majestic hood, and there's very little behind you, as you're almost sitting on the rear axle. Matching the 722 badges located throughout about the car, the cabin is fitted with red seatbelts and stitching to accent the interior, along with red needles in the instrument cluster. A much needed improvement in the cabin of the SLR is the addition of actual paddle shifters instead of disappointing fingertip buttons. In the center of the cabin, you'll find all the normal Mercedes switchgear that allows you to control the air conditioning and the sound system. However, you'll also find the position controls for the air brake, along with the strange gearbox mode selector system that has 2 dials. The dial on the left allows the driver to choose from comfort, manual, and sport. If the dial on the left is in manual mode, then the dial on the right gives the driver the ability to change in between sporty driving shifts, very sporty driving shifts, and racing-like shifts. It really is a strange thing to see from a company like Mercedes. But this was also the beginning of an era where cars allowed you to choose from a variety of drive modes. However, something that is very Mercedes in the 722 is the fact that you cannot fully disable traction control. But that can also be seen as a good thing, as the rear section tires can easily break loose with any clumsy jabs at the throttle. Look below the center console and you'll find the gear lever that also houses the starter button. This aspect wasn't exclusive to the SLR, as you could find it on other AMG models from the 2000s era, but it still feels so special and cool to use. Place the actual key in the ignition and the starter button glows red. Place your foot on the brake and press the button to immerse yourself in one of the naughtiest sounds AMG has ever created. That's all for the Mercedes-Benz SLR McLaren 722S Roadster on this episode of Inside the Lab. Let us know what you think of the Super GT in the comments below. Would you have a 722 over a Black Series SLS? Do you think the SLR is a better car because of the Mercedes-McLaren partnership? What car do you want us to feature next? Check out our inventory at prestigeimports.com and follow us on Instagram at prestigeimports to see our newest arrivals.